The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the small mountain town in a thick layer of white. Inside their cozy, isolated cabin, the Lawson family, David, Sarah, and their teenage daughter, Emily, sat by the fire, enjoying a rare weekend getaway. The cabin, a gift from an old friend of David's, was the perfect escape from their hectic lives in the city. The cabin itself was rustic but charming, with old wooden beams and a large stone fireplace. However, there was something unsettling about the place, something that felt off. Emily had noticed it first, a strange feeling that made her shiver, even with the fire blazing. As the evening wore on, they found an old record player tucked away in a corner. Curiously, a single vinyl record sat on top, its label worn and unreadable. David, always one for nostalgia, eagerly placed the record on the player. The needle touched down, and the room filled with a soft, haunting melody. The music was beautiful, yet there was something eerie about it, as though it echoed from some forgotten corner of the world. They listened in silence, entranced by the sound, until suddenly the music stopped. A voice crackled through the speakers, low and distorted. "Welcome, Lawson family. You've been chosen." David jumped up, pulling the needle off the record, but the voice continued, now coming from the walls themselves, echoing through the cabin. "You have been invited to play a game. The rules are simple. Survive until dawn. If you succeed, you are free to leave. If you fail, well, you'll join those who came before you." Emily clung to her mother, her heart pounding in her chest. David tried the door, but it was locked from the outside. The windows, too, were barred, the thick wood refusing to budge. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. As the last bulb went out, they were plunged into darkness. Then, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. "David," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Before David could respond, the fire roared to life, illuminating a message written in what looked like blood on the stone wall above the fireplace. "Find the truth. Oregon be lost forever." Desperate for answers, the family began searching the cabin. They found old photographs hidden in the drawers, images of other families who had stayed in the cabin before them. The photos were faded and torn, but each showed the same thing: terrified faces, frozen in fear. Emily picked up one of the photos, noticing something strange. In the background of each picture, barely visible, was the shadowy outline of a figure, watching. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Mom, Dad, there's someone else here." Suddenly the record player sprang to life again, playing the same haunting melody. But this time, there was something else mixed in. A faint whisper, repeating a single word: "Basement." The family exchanged nervous glances. The basement door had been locked when they arrived, but now, inexplicably, it stood ajar, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the darkness. David took a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and together they descended into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of damp earth filled their nostrils. The basement was large, much larger than they had expected, with walls lined with old wooden crates and shelves covered in dust. In the center of the room was an old, rotting table, and on it lay a single, tattered book. Its cover was blank, but the pages were filled with strange symbols and drawings, similar to those Emily had seen in her nightmares. As they approached the table, the basement door slammed shut behind them, and the flashlight flickered before going out completely. The darkness was suffocating, and in the pitch black, they heard it, a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something scraping against the floor. Panic set in as they fumbled to relight the flashlight. When it finally flickered back to life, they saw it. A tall, shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room, its eyes glowing, a dull, menacing red. The figure took a step forward, and as it did, the symbols in the book began to glow with a pale, unnatural light. The ground beneath them trembled, and the walls seemed to close in, as if the cabin itself was alive and trying to trap them. Desperate, David grabbed the book and flipped through its pages, searching for something, anything that could explain what was happening. On the last page, he found a handwritten note. "To escape the curse, you must uncover the truth hidden in these walls. The shadow is bound to this place, feeding on the fear of those who enter. It cannot be destroyed, only contained. Find the seal and restore it, or it will consume you as it has done to so many before." Emily, her voice trembling, pointed to a spot on the floor where the glow from the book was strongest. There's something under the floor." David and Sarah quickly cleared the debris, revealing a trapdoor hidden beneath the dirt. With great effort, they pried it open, revealing a small circular chamber below. At its center was a stone pedestal, and atop it, a strange metallic seal covered in the same symbols from the book. The shadowy figure, now only a few feet away, let out a deafening roar. The air around them grew colder, and the walls began to crack as the entity's presence became overwhelming. Realizing that this seal was the only thing keeping the shadow at bay, David frantically tried to place it back on the pedestal, but the shadow lashed out, knocking the seal from his hands. Emily screamed as the shadow loomed over them, its form becoming more solid, more terrifying with each passing second. In a moment of desperation, Sarah grabbed the book and began chanting the words written on the seal, hoping to bind the entity back to the basement. The shadow recoiled, shrieking in pain as the words took effect, but it wasn't enough. The seal had to be restored. "David, now!" Sarah screamed. David lunged for the seal, grabbing it, just as the shadow's cold, clawed hand wrapped around his arm. The pain was excruciating, but he managed to slam the seal back onto the pedestal. A blinding light erupted from the chamber, and the shadow let out one final horrific scream before it was sucked back into the pedestal, disappearing completely. The light faded, and the cabin fell silent. The walls returned to their original state, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The basement door creaked open, and the family, battered and shaken, stumbled back upstairs. The cabin, once so sinister, now felt empty, like a hollow shell. The fire had gone out, leaving only cold ashes in the hearth. The record player, too, was silent, the record cracked and useless. David, still clutching the book, looked at his family, relief washing over him. "It's over. We're safe." But as they prepared to leave, Emily noticed something that made her blood run cold. The final photograph they had found, the one of the last family who had stayed in the cabin, was now different. Their faces were no longer filled with terror, but instead twisted into horrifying, unnatural smiles. And in the background, barely visible, was the shadowy outline of a new figure, standing in the same spot where the family had been. It was their own reflection, distorted and evil, staring back at them. As they raced to leave the cabin, the front door swung open, revealing the snowstorm had ended. The car was still parked outside, half buried in snow. They hurried inside, eager to put as much distance between themselves and the cabin as possible. But as they drove away, Emily glanced back at the cabin one last time. In the rearview mirror, she saw it, the shadowy figure, standing in the doorway, watching them go. The relief they felt was short-lived. Over the next few days, strange things began happening in their home. The same oppressive feeling that had haunted the cabin now filled their house. Objects moved on their own, Cold spots appeared in the hallways and at night, they heard whispers coming from the walls. It wasn't long before they realized the truth. The shadow hadn't been defeated. It had followed them home. The curse, once bound to the cabin, had latched onto them. They hadn't escaped. They had brought the darkness with them. And now, as they slept, it was only a matter of time before the shadow consumed them too. If you have interesting stories and want to tell about them, send them to me by email. Link in description. Bye.